thrill of victory and the agony of defeat.
Great ball around the corner, Petticini, he beats them all! Junior Polar out wide, bumped away from Trindle, Sharks coming through, none of them can hold this!
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host John, also known as 4020. Joining me is my good mate Sixties, on the back of another Parramatta loss in round 4 of the NRL, of the Parramatta Eels going down to the Manly Sea Eagles 26-12. Big fella, look, we spoke about a game last week where the Eels could build and consolidate from, but only if they put the effort out there, and I'm not sure they followed up with what we were looking for in round 4, mate. But first of all, of course, how you doing?
Oh, mate, do you know what? I'm starting to forget what doing a winning instant reaction feels like. I think we had one in the trials, and one and we had a winning instant reaction podcast at the end of the season last year. But you know, you follow your team through thick and thin, and today I sort of feel a bit numb after that game. And I'll tell you why. We spoke last week about the improved effort, because it was an effort game last week. And I actually thought that the Eels won the physical contact battle, especially in the second half against the Bulldogs. Now, in the period at the back end of that first half and the start of the second half, about midway through that second half, I thought the Eels were starting to again win a bit of the physical battle, but we didn't elevate beyond effort today. And I can't extend effort to every player, unfortunately, today. And we'll talk about some of the stats which maybe are evidence of that. But we really lost this on the back of some football that was just, it was dumb. There was...
Yeah. I think a complete lack of football IQ might be a nice way of putting it, 60s. We were texting in between exchanges in the first half, exchanges of play on the field, and we just seemed bereft of any football nous, of any understanding of what our game plan was, of any ability to... We were doing things on the field and we were doing backline moves, but it looked like in treacle slow motion. Like they were not... The Eels are, and again, Mitchell Moses is clearly one of these guys that would fix this to some degree, but we were doing backline moves and we had shapes and we had structures, but it just felt like it was like not even a pose run at training. It was like they were doing a captain's run walkthrough. They weren't, the initial man, the first receiver, the guy that the entire play is predicated on as the pace setter, was just, they started it with a complete lack of speed, and Manly were just able to go, okay, well, clearly they're passing to that guy and then to that guy, so we'll just check off and slide out. And that's why we didn't challenge at all. And there were a couple of times where we had moments down that right edge where, theoretically Sean Russell could have had a hat trick. But anyway, before we get any further, mate, we're sort of getting too far into our preamble. We'll give a quick shout out to the sponsors of the show. So obviously you all know Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta, with Greg and the crew been there since pretty much day dot. So we certainly love the support they bring to TCT, and a huge shout out to Para Leagues, who are partners with TCT and the Tip Sheet on game day and with the Parramatta Junior 60. So good to have them on board. But look, there is not much to spin out of this game in a positive sense, 60s. And I've got the stream title up as an offensive lack of offense, which I think that's where we're at right now, because in that game we had a pretty good window of defense, and Manly scored a couple of early tries, and it was a little bit similar to the Melbourne game in that regard, mate, where there was a couple of tries in the early exchanges, but the game didn't spiral. It was still there as a contest, and then Melbourne obviously in the latter parts of that first half poured on the points. But in this game, the Eels sort of managed to dig a back foot in and find a bit of balance. But through that entire period where the Eels actually showed a bit of resolute defence, they offered nothing in attack. And I am a firm subscriber that defence does win titles, does win championships, does win premierships, but we speak about it. Football is a combined arms game. Like you cannot just be defending your backsides off and expect to win. You need more when you have the ball in hand. And if we can't ask questions of our opponents, then we are on a hiding to nothing every week. And I don't know how the Eels fix this, because it is just at a fundamental level, it is an effort thing. Like you want to have to run the ball hard and fast, be direct, and haul yourself up the ground to play the ball. And you got to keep doing that and doing that. And I'm not sure the Eels are in it. So it
just
is very
to your
frustrating.
point there, John. Just to your point there. So when you've got the ball and you're asking questions of the opponent's defence, you're wearing them out. You're physically challenging them. If you're not physically challenging them in defence, they've got a lot more gas for their own attack. So it ends up being, if you're not throwing anything in attack, you're making it harder for your own defence, because your opponents are always got something in reserve. The Eels aren't challenging the fitness or the conditioning of their opponents whatsoever. And John, to that extent, really, we're getting minimal meters, if anything, from our edge forwards. And whether that's them putting themselves in, not putting themselves into position to make the runs, not receiving the ball, you know, I firmly believe that's not the structures that they train for, that they do train for the edge forwards to be involved in their attacking shapes. But you're right, there's just nothing that's throwing any sort of question at our opponents. And I mean, that's a very clever title that you've delivered there, John, with an offensive lack of offence, of offence, because, mate, you just don't know where the points are going to come from. Look, admittedly, we had a couple of tries taken off us.
Yeah, like Russell goes over 3 times in this game if a combination of Lomax's tip-on passes, and then was it Dean Hawkins that threw the big cutout pass on the last one? Or was it Yongi?
I think it was Yongi.
Yongi, maybe.
I think it was Yongi, yeah.
And look, they were all the correct calls, don't get me wrong. But we score those tries if the passes are backwards. Like, they were try-scoring situations. And the first one was the most crucial one too, because that was first points. That was a chance to dictate the pace of the game to Manly and put the pressure on the scoreboard to our opposition for once. So,
how forward do you reckon the passes were?
I think they were all fairly, like they were in the vicinity of like a metre to a metre and a half forwards, I think. Now, I think that they were the correct calls. Now, whether the ledger's been balanced in terms of the passes that we've seen missed against Parramatta in crucial times in recent seasons, you could make an argument about, but I do think they were the correct calls. And it just speaks to that lack of finesse and touch and polish that you'd almost expect to be there, given how many fundamental issues there are with the Team 60s. And it becomes a really difficult balancing act for the coaching staff, because on the one hand, you're trying to really sharpen up fundamental issues in the team. We're talking about line speed and how direct you play, and all the issues in defense that they've clearly been putting a lot of time into. But on the other hand, then there's the more not rogue elements, but rarer elements that come in attack, where those tip-on passes are harder to train for and harder to execute in the game. So we're also out of sorts there, because you talk about how hard they are in a normal game. The Eels aren't getting a lot of chances to do them either. So when they do get them, they're getting them wrong. So it's it's tough, mate.
As I said last week, we talked about that a repeat of that effort was not going to be good enough. And unfortunately, I think today was a repeat of last week. I think there was quite a lot that was similar, and but for a couple of errors and one or two bad defensive reads, it wasn't too dissimilar to last week. It really wasn't. And given that they were playing away from home, and there was every chance the score could have got ugly when the play just wasn't going Para's way in that first half, and they had a lot less possession than the Sea Eagles. They had a lot more defensive pressure to withstand. And you know what? I was actually pleased with the halftime scoreline only being what it was. And when they pulled back to 14-6, I thought to myself, you know what? They've got a chance to really make a game of this. And they followed up that try with one of the best sets that they played.
I agree that was an actual professional tempo-based set where Manly were actually on the back foot.
Yeah, and to that point, that's the type of football that they want to play. They want to play. The coaches want them to play up-tempo rugby league, and they were delivering that, and it sounds bizarre to be talking about it in one set in an entire game. But at that point, I thought to myself, you know what? They've done what I wanted them to do against Manly, which was stay with them. Because I honestly thought the victory could come by staying with them and maybe frustrating Manly. I thought the conditions might have been a little bit more awkward. The day certainly ended up, even though there was scattering rain throughout the day, they were playing on a field which wasn't giving any concerns about wet weather football, anything like that. But I thought they were maybe going to be really in the contest there, and instead we had some errors that just completely took the wind out of the sails there. And, they were bad errors that happened, one after the other. What happened with Gideon with that carry, mate?
I was actually going to bring that up as in the midst of that run where finally our defence had solidified and we had a little bit of shape and actually were asking some questions of Manly. Gideon has a very good run and the ball comes out, and everyone that I was watching the game with live and everyone that I was chatting to online at the same time had the same reaction. We need to challenge that. I think it was Luke Brooks had his hands all over the ball. The ball came screaming out. We had a challenge in hand. I don't know if the players had forgotten that we won that challenge earlier in the game when Zach Lomax grubber kicked, but there was no interest in challenging. We didn't get a replay either on Fox, so we never got clarification as to whether it was the right call. But the initial reaction to it, a man or a woman or anyone, was that ball came screaming out with hands all over it, and it felt like
Gideon himself
had no confidence. Yeah, exactly. No. And it felt like if we were to mount a challenge in this game, being down 8 points, but with the momentum and cresting something of a wave there, we had the challenge there. And instead, Manly get the ball. I think that was a set where Sean Russell missed the intercept, and then I think they scored the next set, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But I believe they ended up scoring off a prolonged run of possession there, and that pretty much put the game beyond reach.
Yeah, so, then they've quickly added the second try.
Yeah. After
that, yeah. We had, and I can't remember, did they get the try when Sean dropped the bomb, or was that?
Oh, no, yeah, you're right, Sean. Maybe that was what I'm thinking about. Yeah, Sean positioned himself terribly with his back to the opposition try line. So when you're cupping the ball, you're going to be dragging it towards the opposition goal line. Both he and Isaiah had bad drops through the game there in that regard. Maybe that was the error I was thinking about, because he also missed an intercept that I thought led to points, but maybe Jack can call me up on that one. I'm not sure.
You know what? The trouble is that we had these errors which we saw as being critical in the game, and whether they were the ones that were the direct lead up to points or not, they just amounted to pressure being applied to the Eels, to
self-inflicted wounds.
Possession.
Yep, and we finished the first half with a relatively even split of possession, if I'm not mistaken, but when Manly had scored...
No, I think it was 54-46.
Well, that was an improvement, though, because when Manly had scored those 2 tries, they were at over 60% possession in their favour. So, we talk about the scoreboard pressure and being behind and how much you can dictate the flow of the game. The Eels are just killing themselves in that regard. And we have no idea.
If we don't have the attack, John, we're not going to get our noses in.
No,
front.
exactly. And we have no idea what the Eels look like as front runners right now because we haven't been in the lead at any point this year, have we?
No.
Yeah, so there is a huge issue there. And
we had every chance in the world
to
go up against the Tigers.
Against Manly today. Not so much Melbourne. We were actually, reflecting on that game, we were actually in that contest in the first half for about 20 minutes when they scored the first 2 tries and then just got absolutely murdered in the last 10 minutes. But it's difficult because when you're trying to diagnose the issues with the team, like there are clearly elder or senior players that aren't pulling their weight. And the problem is that I understand the calls to cut players and move on from players and try and clear space. And I am open to the Eels exploring that, don't get me wrong. But the problem is in the NRL is that you can't roll over open cap space. You can up to 5%, I believe, but it's not like the NFL where you've got a rolling 4 or 5 year window to spend 95% of that theoretical cumulative cap. And you can actually do a rebuild by cutting players and sort of suffering in a shorter window for a long-term gain. The Eels could be cutting players, but what do you do after that? Like the cap space has to be spent. There are restrictions on front-loading contracts, so you can't just say, all right, let's lock up all these kids and really front-load their money and then get them cheaper in the back end of their contract. We're kind of hamstrung here. There needs to be some very intelligent and maybe even risk-taking recruitment here because you can't just say get rid of, Sean Lane, get rid of Dylan Brown, get rid of all these guys this year. It doesn't work that way.
The other thing too, which complicates things in the short term, and when I'm talking about short term, I'm talking about things like team selection for this season going forward. I thought we saw a very, very low energy, lackluster performance from the New South Wales Cup team today.
Yeah, it was. But after 2 weeks of good gritty efforts, they were very ordinary today. They had the early lead. Joash Papali had a really nice hand in the try down the right sideline, but after that, their finish the first half really set the tone for the game, didn't it? Where Manly just scored back to back soft tries. Yeah,
it was just look. It was highly disappointing because I thought there is. With the way the NRL team has been going, if you put your hand up in New South Wales Cup, there's a chance you're going to be looked at for a call up, and especially if they were to build up a sequence of wins because they won their first 2 games of the season, that your players it'd be possible for them to make a case for inclusion. As it was. We had a Wenty Ron Massey Cup player who scored 2 tries and 2 good tries. Felix Nutili-Schmidt running like an edge back rower should for the 2 tries that he scored. We just, the options that Riles has, as things stand, are very, very limited. Now, if we look at the bench today, we talked about how little NRL game experience there was on the bench, and I didn't see a problem with our bench in terms of their contributions, but it was a grand total of 19 games of NRL experience for the 4 players. That's the total between them. 19 NRL games, including today. So take 4 off it before today. That's what they were looking at. There were the blokes there playing their 4th game of NRL today. So you had Rolly Smith playing his 4th game of NRL. Sam Torvaiti playing his 4th game of NRL. Charlie Geimer playing his 4th game of NRL. And today was for a senior, well, if you can call him the senior one of that group, you had Dan Keir with this was his 7th game of NRL. I mean, you can't expect you can't expect that you're going to win with such inexperience coming off the bench. And yet, as I said, there was no problem with the contributions from the bench. None whatsoever. But, you know, there could be some questions asked of some other players who we're just not getting anything from. And it's hard to understand why we aren't getting something from them, John. You know, it's we can't make excuses on their behalf.
No, and look,
you know, we're talking about some of the better paid players in the team,
and we're now fast approaching sort of an event horizon for Riles where we speak about not wanting to throw more rookies into the cauldron and hurt their development, but I don't think he's getting much more of an option here.
No, and that's the problem. You know, that's why I mentioned the bench with so little NRL experience that's there. His hands are virtually tied with that.
Yeah,
I mean, and as I said, there was no one in New South Wales Cup that said, "Look, you know what? I've got a bit more experience. You should look at me instead," because it didn't happen. And anyone who saw the New South Wales Cup game would realise that. But you're right. I mean, it's to be honest, I don't know what changes he can make at the moment. I honestly don't.
One thing that immediately comes to mind is that in the back line, if you're confident in Bowie Simonson, and I know that chat has had a lot. There was a lot of chat talk about putting Lomax onto the wing. I don't think it's not without merit, but I don't think the Eels will explore that just yet. But
let's have a look at when you're talking about that, John, let's have a look at what's happening inside him, because you're getting the edge back rowers aren't involved, so they're not getting the defense.
There was a great discussion in chat about what is the core factor here is that the halves not feeding the back rowers not getting involved, and this is the ripple effect, isn't it, 60s, where something all the way into the ruck can spark negatively or positively a huge cascading effect either way. But I do think...
You're not necessarily talking about what they're doing with the ball. It can be all the off-the-ball stuff.
Yeah,
if they're not offering themselves for dummy runs...
Well, how many... Dylan Brown, as poor as his overall game was today, showed some signs of life in the first half where he ran the ball a couple of times and actually challenged the defensive line, and he had no one with him. Like, he would go infield 20, 30 metres and no one was coming with him, and that really is symptomatic of a team that does not have any confidence. But getting back to the point I was making, in terms of a senior player change you could potentially enforce moving forwards, assuming that Zach Lomax stays in the centres, which I know will be unpopular with what Chad has been pushing, and I do understand where they're coming from. Like I said, it's not an argument without merit. But what I saw in the first try of the game, 60s, was a centre who is not making the correct reads. Dean Hawkins was there to make it a 3-on-3 situation. Will Penasini checks off his man, goes inside, creates the gap for Jason Saab to go down the field. And sure, Isaiah Yongi had a terrible attempt at the tackle there. Like, he should have made the tackle, but there never should have been a line break. And I think that there is definitely a thought here that Will can go back to Reggie's for a couple of games and let Bailey go into the centres and see how that sort of plays out, because that's multiple weeks in a row now where there's been issues on the left edge where it wasn't Will's fault and Dylan has had a bad read, but there's been multiple times now where Dylan or Dean Hawkins, it was Dylan, not Dean Hawkins, I'm saying, coming in cover, where Dylan or a back rower are there and Will is not trusting them in the man-to-man scenario and is creating a 3-on-2 when it's actually a 3-on-3. So that's definitely one that immediately comes to mind, mate. I know that chat's being keen to get Joash into the side. The problem is if you throw him at fullback, if you throw him at fullback, you're running into the same problems with Isaiah, where neither are big bodies. so neither are giving you a dominant physical presence in that regard. And the bench is already struggling for size and impact in consistency. And
Dylan Walker becomes the obvious.
Dylan Walker's a big inclusion next week, and I think there's Dylan Walker's obviously his supreme value comes in the ability that he is a perfect Swiss Army knife off the bench, but I'm almost in the half a mind to start him 60s. The Eels need to be up tempo from the opening set. I think that while Jermaine Hopgood, he got through 43 tackles and missed one today, so it wasn't a bad effort on the numbers, but scrutinising his game live, I felt like he was really struggling to get the marker at times. I feel like he is not offering enough in attack. I think I counted one positive run where it felt like he actually challenged the defensive line. So maybe Walker is a solution there. But beyond,
would you then put Jermaine Hopgood onto the bench and introduce him fresher to the game?
Yeah, fresher.
So when he's instead of being the workhorse, he's doing shorter minutes and can maybe focus a little bit more on his attack, bring impact to the game, because you're right, he's having to do so much work. But then what I also wonder is, especially for the potential first game, you have Dylan Walker on the bench and he replaces Jermaine Hopgood, and he provides that spark that maybe we're after from Jermaine Hopgood.
Perhaps.
Because
I don't think there's a straight out obvious correct solution here. That's the problem, is that the Eels don't have a silver bullet sitting in reserve grade to make things obvious. And even with the recruitment of Dylan Walker, he is going to improve the team. But you can't just say start him at 13 or put him at 14 and everything's fixed. So that's the issue that we find ourselves in. And in terms of the senior players in reserve grade, I just don't see it. Like Madison in full form obviously improves the Eels in first grade, but he would be in first grade if there wasn't issues there. Same with Bryce Cartwright, who didn't even play this week, did he? Right, 60s.
No, he got injured last week.
Yeah, and he was obviously trying to fight to be fit for this one, but didn't make it. You got Tony,
and I think, and I don't like to comment on these sorts of things. I have it in my head that Matt Dury might have picked something up at training during the week.
Yeah. Well, Hayes Dunster was also out in reserve grade this week too, so he obviously was dinged up.
So I think same deal. I think it was, he maybe got a bit nicked up at training. So, and these sorts of things happen. It happens to every team.
And so beyond that, you're looking, it's not Woody, it's not Matto right now. So you're looking at, Tony Mattielli. It felt like he was trying to, press to make a difference today at times. He was running and offloading, but that's another rookie 60s.
And that's therein is a big problem. I think the unquestionable change is Dylan Walker comes in. He comes in ASAP, and he's going to have little time to familiarise himself. But you know what? Our players that are out there are playing like strangers, so I don't think it makes any difference to introduce a stranger to them. There's no cohesion in attack. So I think I have no doubt about the need for his inclusion next week. To me, that's a no-brainer. But here's where it gets interesting, I think, John, is if you include him at 14, what do you do with the 9? Because at the moment, Riley Smith's playing 14, coming on as the 9. So do you have Dylan Walker plus Riley Smith on the bench? Do you move Riley Smith to a starting number 9 and move Joe Lussick out of the team, and then expect Dylan Walker to come on and play as a potentially as a 9? The first match of the year against the Storm, Riley Smith played as close to 80 minutes as you're going to get. I think he played about 65 minutes or something like that. And it was only like some cramp in the last 5 minutes that stopped him from playing, the basically everywhere from about the 60th or 65th minute of the 10th or 15th minute of the game all the way through. look, a lot of people were hating on Joey Lussick. I don't know that. I don't.
He had a couple of poor moments in attack, kicking the ball and running it when there was opportunity to spread it. But look, Lussick is not anywhere near the biggest issue of his team right now. Not to say he's not an issue, but
that's the point. Like he is, like, people could make an argument that he's not the best option for the team, that, like, people are quite happy to go with Riley Smith for 80 minutes maybe, but you can't question the effort and commitment of Joey Lussick at the moment. Maybe, as you said, a couple of judgment calls weren't great, but
he is far from the biggest issue of the team. So There's no elegant solution here. I think ideally in the long term you're sort of projecting Riley to be able to carry the load for 80 minutes as he comes into his own in first grade. Right now though, if you do go down that path where he starts or is the primary dummy half, maybe you look to the Melbourne model, or at least the model that used to exist when Harry Grant and Brandon Smith were both on the team, and you start Smith/Grant, bring on Riley Smith, not Brandon Smith, bit of confusion there, bring on Walker at dummy half, and then when you reintroduce Riley into the game, he replaces a middle forward, and Dylan Walker then transitions to lock forward and just plays out the game as a middle forward. That might be a solution, but then again, it also takes away from the biggest area of improvement where Dylan Walker can boost the Eels in that middle rotation, being a more dynamic and up-tempo ball-playing lock in that initial wave or initial rotation. So I'm not sure, mate. It's not easy. We did have, going back to the Joash Papali discussion, there were some people asking, can we play him on the wing? And I would say no.
It's just...
Joash is an exciting and dynamic playmaker, but he is too small for what the Eels require from their back five or back three in terms of rucking the ball out. And not to say he couldn't make an effort to cut the ball up, but he will get dominated physically if you put too much or allow the defense to open up on him defensively, rucking the ball out.
Yeah. Now, John, I wanted to reference a couple of some team stats. That possession ended up 55-45 to the Seagulls for the entire match. So we're up against it there. The Seagulls had about 5 minutes more time in possession. It was like 30-25. Completion rate, we're down at 73%. The Seagulls at 86%. Now, there was a point, it might have even been for the entire first half. I think we might have been something like 19 or 21 or something like that. Like, we had a really good completion rate in the first half, despite being down 12-0. Like, those sorts of errors were minimal, but we found it. Boy, did we find those errors in the second half. They smashed us with run meters. They got, probably nearly an extra 400 run meters against us. Surprisingly, we had a faster play the ball speed. The kick defusal wasn't too great. They put up 7 bombs. We put up 3. They diffused every one of our kicks. We only could handle 60% of the ones that went to us. So I think that says a bit about the pattern of the game, where we made our job harder through things like incomplete sets. And as I said, it was incomplete sets at a time where we were charging back into the game. We just, I don't know, John, like I said it before at the start, the footy IQ was not great today. The errors came at the worst possible time. Not that there's a great time for errors. The completion rates just weren't what they needed to be. Again, effort high, like we said last week. Finesse, not high, not good. And we couldn't have a repeat of last week, and yet we did. We were a little bit buoyed about last week, but we cautioned that. we cautioned that. We said it wasn't going to be good enough going forward, and we got exactly what we delivered last week. So maybe Riles might be able to say that the positive is the effort that's going in there, but the complete inability for the attack to function is not. It's, it needs to change and change quickly. Will it make that much of a difference with Mitch Moses? I reckon he improves our attack maybe up to 30%. But you got to think, man, key players just aren't performing. And that's Dylan. People are saying, look, Dylan's just doing what Dylan always has done. No, like his games this year have been the worst I've ever seen from Dylan Brown. We've never been Dylan Brown bashers. We've been Dylan Brown supporters. And we're seeing games from him, the like of which we've never seen before. I don't care what people say about him. It's exactly the same as it always has been. We've always counted that he's had lack of support when he's been tasked with being the main half in the team. And he's never going to be an organiser. That's never going to be the case. But his running game was always really good. And he suffered from a lack of support players around him. His defensive game was always really, really like par excellence. And I thought we saw glimpses of his running game again today. We saw glimpses of his best defence work, but it was only glimpses, and he went back into the shell, was shoveling the ball off. Not quite the same effort a couple of times in defence. The one thing that concerned me, John, in that first half was when Saab was racing away and Dylan Brown had been done for pace.
Absolutely cooked for pace, yeah.
He actually put the guns back in the holster and just jogged along. And that was never Dylan Brown. Like, Dylan was always that bloke who would chase for 100 metres and never give up. He gave up in that moment. And, it was 100% chance that Saab was going to get away. But he gave up before it got to Iongi. What if Iongi had got enough on him to have him bumbling and stumbling, put him completely off his stride, and the chance was there for Dylan to come from behind and make the tackle. He didn't put himself in that position. Like, that really disappointed me. And people who know me know what a huge advocate for Dylan that I've always been. But that was really, really disappointing. I don't think he had as bad a game today as what a lot of people are saying. I don't think he deserves the level of criticism I've seen today. But I don't think there's any cause for praise by the same token. And I honestly thought, well, I called it. I said he was my tip to be the Eels' best player on the field today, because I thought he'd find something.
Gallagher raises an interesting point in chat too, saying that, I am adding that on top of like all the other stuff we discussed, but he's saying that partial tear of his ACL could be playing on his mind, and he could absolutely be playing for himself. That's actually a fair shout out there, Gallagher. And look, I'm just in chat, guys, and I know people have been reading it, but just to reinforce, I saw a few little jabs at Jason Riles. You guys know that everyone is fair game if you can be critical about your discussion, but we won't let the little jabs and snide remarks, even if they're in jest, stand, because it spirals so quickly, and what becomes just a little joke can be a huge pile on. Jason Riles, he's not above criticism. He's 0-4, but it is also a rebuild job, so just bear that in mind. And if you've got issues of how the Eels are approaching games schematically, how they're using the bench, and how they're preparing for certain players, we can discuss that. That is fair game. But, don't pile onto the coach just for the sake of, little digs, because you can do that on social media, you can do that on other platforms, but, you guys know that with TCT that we sort of hold ourselves to a certain standard, and that includes the community. So just a fair shout out there.
Yeah, we don't allow anything that gets towards personal attacks. So if you want to get into name calling or personal attacks, take it somewhere else.
And look, chat's been great for like the first couple of weeks of the live stream, and I do want to stress, we as fans, everyone is doing it tough right now. So I understand frustration, and I'm not sitting here threatening the permaban people. It's just a reminder. Let's discuss football. So
yeah, absolutely. So, mate, let me throw it over to you. Have we got any questions there that's coming in?
We do have plenty. Chat has been in good form, barring that. But what have we got here? So obviously, general frustrations. Dave sort of starts off on a humorous note, saying that the highlight of the game was Sean Lane getting knocked out with the ball while standing and doing nothing. That really did encapsulate where we're at right now, wasn't it? Sean Lane getting the KO there. He obviously managed to pass his HIA though and scored a try. Damien points out no leaders on the field, and that is definitely an issue. That is, Damien's been part of our live streams and he knows that we've discussed it, but it stands out, doesn't it? And this is a game where I thought, again, for the second week running, that Junior Barlow actually tried his backside off, and while the numbers weren't incredible, you could see he was out there having a dig, but there's no voice, no direction, no one taking this team by the scruff of its neck and saying, get in line. So definitely true, Damien. Vanessa says, imagine if Manly were on their A game, and thankfully they weren't. But again, that also makes it frustrating because, like Canterbury the week before, Manly were decent today, but they were there to be beaten, and the Eels just really struggled. Damien again says Eels' attack was pedestrian, 100%. What else we got here?
That's maybe a compliment, to be fair.
Yeah, I agree that's maybe been, and sort of going back to what we're saying about criticism, that's probably been on the other end of the spectrum, being too kind. Dave Calgara says that Yongi has lost confidence and says it's maybe time to give some time on Reggie's. There's probably a discussion to be had around that in the near future. My issue with Iyongi, and it's probably not just an issue pertaining just to him, is that we are not using him in a way to maximize his skill set. It feels like we're falling into the trap again of your fullback setting up for the next play and being in a different position when there are opportunities to be up and support and creating line breaks by backing up players like Dylan Brown, or there were a couple of forwards like Gideon Katonga today that had a couple of carries here and there that they had opportunities to promote the ball, and we're not. Oh, hello. But yeah, we're not getting the most out of him. What else?
I think probably one of the main things too, John, that speaks to that. I raised it before with that one set that I said was a great set from the Eels after they scored points, where they advanced that play right down the field and had Manly galloping backwards. Now, the problem with us at the moment is that those moments, like, I drew attention to it because it happened once.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the only time I could talk about it happening once. We're not seeing anything from the players who will maybe give us that spark in attack, be it Lomax, be it Iongi, be it the Fox, because they're getting the ball with the defence right on them.
Yep.
They're getting ball without space.
And
there's nothing being created. That we haven't got defences going backwards or guessing what we're going to do. We've got defences that are able to come up to us.
Yeah.
And they know
exactly diagnose exactly what's happening. Exactly. Yeah. On that vein,
literally moving the ball for us has just been shoveling it backwards and forwards.
Yep.
From either left to right. There's nothing with it that's asking questions. That's what we opened up this podcast with in talking about. There's nothing that's being asked of the defence. If you've got no questions being asked of the defence, number one, they've got lots of energy for their own attack, as I said before. And number two, their defence builds in confidence. Like, they just keep getting to come forward all game. That's like, we're literally giving teams like a training run in that regard.
Yeah. And on the back of that, focus on our offense, Brent Mirando asks, who was orchestrating this attacking scheme? The players have shown they're capable of breaking the line. Is it a lack of coaching ability? Now, this is obviously an interesting question because the team in its current iteration is still in its infancy, isn't it? With a new coaching staff and a transitional roster. So where do you put accountability, 60s? Because I think, as always, I think there is a balance on the ledger. Players and coaches need to take responsibility, of course. But we saw in that trial against Newcastle what conceptually Jason Riles and I believe Scott Wisemantle and Nathan Brown, probably if you had to look at that brains trust and offense, what they wanted to see from the Parramatta Eels. But since then, there's been very few signs of that concept.
Yeah, and there's almost a chicken and the egg with this because I don't believe we're getting the punch from the forwards that we need. I don't believe that we're getting the speed of the play that they trained for all through the preseason. If you had have seen what I was watching in the preseason, they were training to play a genuine up-tempo game. And what we are seeing, as was described before, was pedestrian football. We look the slowest of any team that's playing each week. Yep. Like, we're sitting at the bottom of the table with the Dolphins. The Dolphins are far more threatening attack than
if we were to play the Dolphins next week, I would be very confident that they would be strong favourites. And
they would be. So we're not. It's been like the wheels have come off from that second trial onwards, and it's hard to understand because Moses wasn't in that first trial. You saw it. The Haas were digging into the line, Dylan Brown included. You had the back rowers running great lines off them. There was bodies in motion when we had the ball. And I know it was just a trial, and they were playing a Newcastle team that was also had a number of players missing. Like, both teams had players missing, but as John just said, conceptually, that is what they wanted. That is what the coaches want the Eels to play. Now, the question mark, of course, becomes, have they simply not got the cattle to execute the type of play that they want to? And therefore, do they need to have a massive rethink about the brand of football that they want to play? Or, as was the case with Cameron Ciraldo, that you stick the course, you have faith in the systems that you're trying to implement, and you build up the roster to be able to play the brand of football that you're trying to bring about. The problem for Eels supporters, and it's completely understandable, is they're not actually seeing any evidence of the type of football that conceptually the coaches want the team to play, apart from a trial game. They're not seeing any evidence of it whatsoever. They're seeing a team that is leaking as many points as they were at any time last year, and a team that conversely cannot score the points, can't get close to the number of points that the Eels were able to score last year. Now, we played 2/3 of the season last year without Mitch Moses. So you can't point entirely at Mitch Moses and say, well, we're missing him, so we're not as much of a chance of scoring points. Then people might point to Clint Gutherson and say, well, we haven't got Gutho, we shouldn't have let him go. The fact is, we were lucky to have Gutho on the field the amount of times that we did last year. That's how banged up he was. Or knocked up, not knocked up. That's what I got into trouble for saying the other week, wasn't it? How banged up he was. Look, that's probably a debate in itself about the departure of Gutherson. Should they have kept Gutherson for his leadership alone?
Look,
Would we be
let's
performing as badly?
let's not lose sight of the Gufferson discussion too. The Eels did not jettison Quinton Gufferson. They were looking to transition him to that utility role and couldn't guarantee him a long-term contract. So he took, the job security at St. George. So it's not like Ryle said, no, Gufferson is not good for this team. And that is different from where we were for Reagan Campbell-Gillard, who was brought up in the chat as well, where the Eels did part ways of him on more of a are you in or out sort of deal, I believe, and he went to the Gold Coast. And he has not set the world on fire there. And we love Reg, so he'll probably come good there. Don't get me wrong. But, we made
Reg normally warms into a season.
Exactly. And we made tough roster calls. And, yeah, they might bite us in the backside in the short term. But I think we played on the theory of better a year late than a year early in that regard. So I don't fault the recruitment and retention and the coaching staff on that regard. Maybe it was the wrong call, but I can definitely see the logic there. Going through a few more comments and questions before we wrap up, guys. I mean, Aaron Lovelock makes a salient point. Nobody pushes up around the ball. That is very apparent, and it completely derails that scheme and concept we're talking about. If you're not playing in support and you're getting picked off and allowing the wrestle to dominate you while you're in possession, then you're just not in the contest.
And I want to make a stronger point of what Aaron had to say too, because it is spot on. It is spot on. You pointed it out, John, where there were a couple of runs that Dylan made today where there was no one running with him. No one presented as an option. Again, that's another thing that they worked on all through the preseason was players running up in support, bodies in motion, but it's just not happening. And Aaron, you couldn't be more correct. It's like it's a big part of why our attack looks so predictable is there just isn't other options for, like, the ball is just being shoveled left to right to left, left to right, right to left. Basic block play here and there. And
the couple of times we actually have shape, Manly immediately looked like they were going to break. And, I think that was the final Sean Russell no try was on the back of actually good shape. And he was going over easy. If that pass was backwards, they still don't touch him. So it just shows you in the space of just two mirrored plays versus what we were doing earlier, if you could easily find another play where we're just going side to side, having just a little bit of impetus earlier towards the ruck suddenly just opens up doors. And the Eels need to find a way to do that consistently, obviously. A lot of discussion. I haven't got a specific question here, 60s, because there was actually a sort of chain discussion of it. But a lot of emphasis on our back rowers and both, schematically what we saw today and then just as a positional need and, as a target for recruitment. I don't disagree. I think the Eels definitely will be targeting back rowers. Biggest name on the market right now, I think, is Kai Pearce-Paul. He's young, tall, athletic at Newcastle. Is he a fit for next year? And then if you do sign Kai Pearce-Paul, obviously you open the door for further discussions about a player swap between Newcastle and Parramatta. But if
Can I also suggest that there is a player at the Eels who's injured at the moment who I think may yet figure later in the year, and that's Will Latu.
Yeah, Will picked a terrible time to roll his ankle or whatever it was he did in round 2. But even so, he wouldn't have been available until round 10. So probably a silver lining on that one there in terms of a bad injury. I think Will Latu definitely gets a crack this year, 60s. I'm not against an experienced, hard-nosed back row if they can find it, though. But the question is, who's out there? An Angus Crichton would be fantastic, but obviously he's signed up with the Roosters. But players of that sort of ilk, I think, would add a lot to the back row.
And John, the other thing that becomes truer is the longer that the malaise is there, the harder it becomes to recruit players as well.
Yeah. And again, we mentioned it last week, but with the Tigers and the Dogs, who had genuinely terrible runs, you can still make things happen. So the challenge becomes the Parramatta between fat wads of cash, which is the unfortunate reality. It's just saying what it is, and also selling Jason Ryles' vision. You have to find a way to find those core players, those big recruits, alongside smart recruitment and player development, obviously. And then we have the B&G Army podcast asking us, do you guys still reckon we are regretting both Blaze and Sanders? Obviously, it's in the context of letting those players go. We didn't let them go, though. They were signed to good deals, especially in Ethan's case. Obviously, with the benefit of hindsight, losing Ethan Sanders is brutal in the context of Dylan Brown going to Newcastle. But that wouldn't have been Parramatta's recruitment parameters, wouldn't it, 60s? The plan would have been for Dylan and Moses to steer the Eels for the next 5 years. And unfortunately, things have played out differently. So, yeah, I think there is regret in that regard, but you can't get too hung up on it because...
no, you like Ethan went for an extremely good offer down at the Raiders. I think he's got an injury at the moment, might keep him out for a little bit of time. But Blaze, again, he said he went for the opportunity of playing in, at Penrith. I think he was offered more money to stay with the Eels.
That was how it was reported 100%, yeah. And Penrith's offer was competitive, don't get me wrong. It's not like he took a monster pay cut, but the Eels definitely were above the Penrith offer. And he went to the back-to-back premiers. And obviously it's not working too well right now, but there's a lot of football to be played in that regard.
I guess the question comes down, John, would be more how those players who made those decisions, how they would feel looking at how things are playing out here now with Dylan Brown moving on, because without question, the long-term arrangements for Mitch and Dylan at Parramatta make it difficult for halves that are coming through the system to see short-term opportunity at the club. So, I guess you can look at Mitch now and show that there's a likely end date with him, with his age and the contract that he's just signed. Whether he does a Cherry Evans and can play, past 35 is another matter. But I don't know that I don't know that we can talk about regret or talk about because we couldn't have matched the offer that Ethan Sanders got from Canberra. Blaze. Well,
I mean, we could have matched the Ethan Sanders offer if we knew that Dylan was moving on. That's a completely different scope of discussion, but we didn't. Like, again, we're operating from the parameters that Dylan Brown is either activating his player option or something else positive happens there, gets through the player options and signs a different contract. And unfortunately, Newcastle came in with a super aggressive contract. So that is what it is. And again, it does suck to lose those two players, but within how things played out, I don't think you can look at Parramatta and say we regret how we handled it. So not to say that we didn't want to keep him. What else we got here? Ben says the entire left edge except for Josh Adokar can get in the bin. Not too far off the truth there, mate. They definitely need to work on a lot of things. What else we got here? Our attack is predictable. Damien, you're absolutely right. Mitch Andrews says the bench players have outplayed some of the starting side. We agree on that 100%. A lot of talk about Riley Smith starting. We touched on that 60s, so we don't need to go too much more into depth there. I think that Riley is definitely progressing towards being the starting dummy half there. We spoke about Josh Papali. What else do we have? Look, Ben Johnson says, I'm in for changes purely to set standards. I agree. And look, Jason Riles has been acting on that philosophy. He hasn't kept the same side 2 weeks in a row. He's made changes where he could. And again, we're sort of hamstrung by who's available with the injury toll and then how many rookies you want to throw in. But at least in my perspective, I am approaching the point where maybe we just need to throw more rookies in and just get guys that actually want to give a shit about being out there and putting in some effort. So, Damien...
this might be the really first litmus test Team List Tuesday.
Yeah,
coming up.
It speaks to the direction that Jason Riles wants to take the team this season, whether he sort of backs the incumbents and the experienced players to turn things around, which, based on recent form across the last couple of seasons, probably isn't the smartest idea. But again, he is somewhat hand-tied by what he can do. Like, he can put more rookies in there, although even in saying putting more rookies in there, he has also got restrictions in the top 30 right now about who he can just pick. So it's, Tony Mattielli, it's Arthur Miller-Steven, and I don't think Artie gets into the back line. He can't pick Jordan Samrani unless there's a roster change there. But moving on, Damien has a question for me. He says, I respectfully disagreed about Will last week, and that is true. I think there was a little bit more nuance there in terms of Bailey Simonson wasn't ready to be changed, and I did defend Will, certainly. But I think it was on the proviso that defensively he couldn't afford the same lapses that we saw today. So Damien having the better of that argument, though. And I am certainly open to Will having a short stint at least in New South Wales Cup if they're confident in Bailey Simonson being able to step in. Will needs to trust his inside man, and that if the play is broken on his interior, it is Dylan Brown's fault or the back row's fault, however they're lined up in a given play. You cannot, in a 3-on-3 situation, continue to check off your opposite centre and create the 3-on-2. That is just a cardinal sin in terms of edge defence. A few more things we got here before we wrap up. More talk about Riley Smith, how Dylan Walker's going to be used. Clark Kent says start Walker at 9, spell Hopgood and Riley goes to 9. They're probably,
and we need Clark Kent on the field.
Yeah, we could use a Clark Kent out there for sure. People agreeing that Lussick hasn't been horrible, but sort of you want to see that move towards Riley Smith again. No arguments from us. Obviously, Joey Lussick is holding down that initial fort there for Riley, but Riley is clearly the big picture dummy half moving forwards. Then we obviously had the chat about the chat standards. A lot of chats there. What else we got, boys, before we wrap up? Yeah, this is a big time for Riles. I agree. Like we said, the litmus test this team was Tuesday certainly lines up with that. Gallagher says if we lose on Saturday, we're officially in crises. You can't really argue with that, can't you, Sixties? If you go 0-5, you're in a hole that's going all the way to China at that point. So you're looking at a completely different change in how you approach the season. And certainly I missed some comments about cutting Dylan above, which I meant to get to. I think that's when you really open the door for that line of thought about moving on from Dylan Brown and seeing what you can get in the context of the season. Because again, it is an interesting thought exercise to talk about cutting players and moving on and setting standards. And I certainly agree to an extent, 60s. And this isn't a fence-sitting comment. It's more about the limitations you have from a roster construction viewpoint about what you can do if you do move on from guys like Dylan Brown this year. Like, shipping him to Newcastle is one thing, but you need to be making the team better. And it's not a case of addition by subtraction with someone like Dylan, because when he's on, $800, $900 million, whatever it is this year, and obviously pro rata, he's gone through a good chunk of his salary for the 2025 cap as it stands. So you're not going to.
That's a lot of money to be on, John. 800, 900 million.
Yes, well, if he's on $1 billion, the way that would work out, or just about, yes, he'd be a very wealthy player. But yeah, moving on from a player is one thing. You need to make the team better short and long term by doing it. And I'm not sure the options are there. But who knows? Maybe if the season gets in the tank, Dylan might agitate for release. That's something that could happen down that way there.
John, it's just a real truism in rugby league. If you drop a player, you have to have someone better coming in to take their place. So the argument would then be for this week whether Riles simply selects Dylan Walker instead of Dylan Brown. Because that to me would be, and I mean, I know you were talking about cutting and people were talking about cutting him, like just shipping him straight off. But I think in the first instance where you're talking about not selecting him, again, you have to have someone better to come in his place. And if that's why I said I think this week becomes the first litmus test.
And in that regard, Gallagher raises the point that we didn't touch on that I did want to mention. He says, Lane, 4 runs for 29 metres, please, another that needs to go. Yeah, his effort was terrible today, I agree. I'd be completely comfortable with him getting dropped. And then the macro discussions about that, obviously that there's some stuff in the periphery 100% about moving him on, but at least next week I am all on board for him getting dropped.
That's why this is a litmus test, because there was a lot of effort players out there, and we said there was no finesse, there was no cohesion in attack. Attack was abominable. But when you talk about effort, there were players out there that a lot of players that delivered effort, but there was some individuals that didn't.
Yep.
And unfortunately, when you look at just the stats, it stares you in the face there. And there was also an eye test, the eye test with that as well during the game. So yeah, you didn't have to look at any further at stats. Look, to be fair to Sean Lane, ideally he would have come back through games in New South Wales Cup, because he just had a wretched pre-season.
And it's not the first time we've seen him start slow on the back of an injury recovery, having to get to his anywhere near form. So,
I just didn't think. Sometimes I think it's unfair to select a player. Now, you can talk about these are professional footballers and they should be able to deliver better. And I'm not here to argue with that. I can't, because the bloke's well paid. He's out there. You got to get more run meters out of him than what he delivered today.
Couple more things, 60s, just quickly.
I do think he had to come back through New South Wales Cup.
Blue and Gold Army podcast asked us, would we give Dunster a go for a huge return to first grade? Look, Hayes missed this week, so he's obviously dinged up. He's been really good in reserve grade, but by the same token, I don't think guys like Sean Russell have been the issue. So Hayes might get his opportunities, but I don't think he being Sean Russell has been an issue. Peter's.
I think Hayes impressed the coaches in his first.
No doubt.
Runs.
No doubt. He's done the right thing. But opportunities will come. Peter Z asked, when is Moretti back? We're hoping next week, 60s. That'll be a boost.
There you go. There's the other option. I knew there was something there that we'd forgotten in terms of selection options. He is meant to be back next week. So whether that actually transpires, I don't know.
Not a huge experience boost, but certainly he's going to be a player that will rip in, and we need as much as we can get. Gallagher suggests give them Dylan Brown and we take Heverington and Frizzell. I think Jack Heverington's probably too much of a wild card, but I would entertain Tyson Frizzell. The man doesn't seem to age and gives you a bit of experience in the back row, so there's definitely some merit there. And then anything else before we wrap up? Kicks asked Simonson back next week as well. I think he is now would be considered eligible for NRL return. 60s gotten through a game and a half, and I certainly propose the idea of replacing Will Penasini with Bailey, so I would hope that he's in contention. But who knows? The coaching staff might want another 80 minutes out of him just to be safe, but we'll find out on Tuesday.
What do you think of his performance in New South Wales Cup?
I thought he tried. Tried to get involved. Opportunities weren't there or weren't really flowing and forthcoming in the first half. We haven't got the numbers, so I couldn't give you exact feedback in that regard, but he was looking to get involved, which is a good sign. The fact that he trusted that ACL a few times to really plant the foot and make a few steps is good. So, hopefully he's in the mix for first grade selection next week. And on that note, I think we'll start wrapping things up, big fella. Obviously, just a very disappointing performance. Eels firing absolute blanks in attack, and as long as they continue to do that, they're not going to be challenging for a win. And the players and the coaching staff need to find something before Mitchell Moses is back, because the timeline for him is somewhere between round 7 and round 9 based on what the Eels are suggesting, and that's not considering any sort of setback, knocking on wood right there. But he already had the initial setback, so who knows?
So based on that, we're looking at anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks before we see him again.
And you're not a one-man team. Clearly what we're seeing from the Parramatta Eels now is an argument that Moses is among the most valuable players in the competition, because that's how much he elevates the team. But that's not good enough. That for a professional football team, these players need to be standing up and being counted far more. And it's going to be a tough challenge for a rookie coach to instill that fire in an aging roster, because clearly the young players are responding to what he is saying. We're not having an issue with the young players. We saw some errors. Sam Tuivasa had a drop today. That's going to happen. But he's out there, tackling his backside off. And I think he had 5 or 6 missed tackles. But if you watch what he's doing, he is chasing the ball and trying to put the wood on someone. So that's not the issue. It's the senior players not standing up. And I don't know how he manages to stoke the flames, but he has to, or we're in big, big trouble.
Yep. Okay. Well, look, I think that just about does wrap things up, John.
Thanks to everyone
We're not
tuning
going to
in,
go.
guys.
We're not going to go with our 3-2-1 this week.
No.
We did last week because there was someone that had to get a 3, and the effort was there. We didn't see any advancement on last week.
No.
And to be perfectly honest, John, I would be struggling to pick a 3-2-1 based on today, because I thought, I didn't think there was anyone that really stood out above anyone else. We saw a collection of players that were wholehearted effort plays and maybe were deserving of ones in a 3-2-1. So I think we give the 3-2-1 another skip this week. So that brings us to the end of this live podcast. Thanks to our sponsors, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta, and to Parramatta Leagues Club, the home of the Eels, where we will see you this week before the St George game. We're on about 2 hours, just over 2 hours before the main game. So by my calculations, that puts us at about 1:45. On Saturday this week in Jack's Bar and Grill, we'll find out. Sorry, not Jack's Bar and Grill, in
Sterlo's.
In Sterlo's.
Yep.
In Sterlo's. My apologies there. As soon as we find out who our legend guest will be, we'll let you know on our socials and also in the podcast. But John, I have to say it because I always do. Go you mighty Eels.